So the small success we had on that was at least unearthing it, and we had a most stand-up row in both Houses of Parliament, and we didn't actually succeed in turning it back. I haven't given up yet, but we didn't succeed then. And it was very disappointing that the unions weren't very much more with us and whatever. But I mean, the amount of support we got was very, very little, and I was very sad about that. We did have a success though on collective worship, where as a direct result of an initiative that Terry and I did, we got older pupils to be able to withdraw themselves from collective worship and maintain schools, and that's something I hope I'll be able to improve on, but at least something to have achieved in that area, which is the Department for Education and the governments, both colours, are breathtakingly pro-religious or frightened of the religious lobby, so getting anything is quite difficult, and I tend to try and use other areas to get help, mainly through the courts or through the European Commission and those kind of, the Equality and Human Rights Council, other bodies to actually back me up. And I certainly had in doing that the backing of the Joint Committee on Human Rights in Parliament, and even then I didn't get as much as they thought I ought to have got in the definition of the kids that could be withdrawn.
So from what age was that?
Well, it ended up, I wanted 14 or 15, and there was it actually relies on the Gillick principle about contraception, about children being able to have contraception without their parents' involvement. It was an extension of that, and the criterion is children of, excuse this isn't exactly the right phrase, but something close to it, of sufficient knowledge and experience or something like that, and that's what we were applying to this. That I was up against slightly practical points in that kind of putting that in. I couldn't find anywhere else in the legislation where there was that kind of fuzzy definition rather than a specific age. So I tried to put in 15 and didn't get away with it, and in the end it became sixth form pupils, which wasn't really, I wanted, it was only a half victory. But it was a victory in principle, if not in that. And the Conservative government even opposed that, which I think tells us something that we don't really want to know. Well, let's just go back now to education in a wider sense. I'm always fascinated by the fact that the word clerical means two very different things. And of course it is back from the time when the only people who could write were, of course, those in the church pretty well. And obviously they sometimes taught that to others. But there's a kind of idea that the church tries to put around which, oh, we're the sole source of education and we do it entirely for benign purposes. And I don't think that's all of the truth. I think it's much more to do with the fact that what they're into is into indoctrination, and unless you get them young, it don't work. A few years ago, I just happened to be in Tahiti, not for very long, because my goodness, it's expensive. But what was astonishing there, it is effectively another French département, and I assumed that it would be Roman Catholic. It isn't. It's Methodist. How could it be Methodist? And the answer is they had faster boats. And that's, they were just all there, just trying to get the converts, and whoever got there first was. So well,
the problem was just as anti-homosexuality, though. That form of Methodism sort of migrates according to the ambient environment, doesn't it?
Yes, I think that's right. Yes, indeed it does. So, and the other kind of myth about this is the churches, if it hadn't been for the churches, we wouldn't have all these schools all over the place. Well, again, I'm not sure about that. I mean, it's not difficult to find examples of where you have archbishops in the Lords actually opposing public schooling. Why would they be opposing public schooling? Because they wanted church schooling, not public schooling. And then that again gives succor to this idea that it it really is about indoctrination. And I don't know whether you've ever heard people in the church talk about the national society. They're not so, well, they sometimes talk about the NSS, but not in those words. And when they talk about the national society, it's a society that used to have a terribly long name that's now got a terribly short name. Because if you use the terribly long name, it sounds a bit grim, because it's something like the National Society for the Propagation of the Doctrines of the Church of England to the Poor, which kind of gives the game away, doesn't it? But it's still there. You just look, if you put in National Society into your computers, you will find it is the still very active organisation promoting education within the Church of England. It's basically the Church of England's educational arm. So
it was the National Society for the Propagation of the Gospel.
Yeah, something like that. I mean,
My grandmother used to do accounts, but I eventually didn't know what they wanted to put on SPGB. Sundays probably grub.
Yes, indeed. So, but of course, the scale of this is actually of the church's grip on our education system. It is breathtaking. It's a quarter of the schools are Church of England schools. A third of the schools are religious schools, so that takes in the Catholic ones as well. And so really, they have a massive qualitative grasp on the education system. And I think quite a qualitative one as well. And what seems to be happening, the very antithesis of secularism, is that as the Church of England attendance is going down at a precipitous rate, the degree of religiosity is going up in schools. And I don't think people are realising that. I see this quite a lot in the House of Lords. You know, I spend quite a bit of time. And you just see it with the body language in the Bishop's Bench. And over that 15 years I've been watching it, we moved from a relatively liberal position, where the Liberals have been in the ascendant, or at least the biggest group, to gradually moving to the point where the evangelicals are the ones who are coming up, and the older ones who seem to be the more liberal are becoming more silent and gradually falling off their perches, and it's actually quite disturbing. And I don't think people realise just what's happening. And it's partly a function of, as the church attendances drop, the people who leave aren't the average people. They're people who leave are the more kind of liberal people, and you leave, I would never say them, it needs to look after the asylum, but you know, just a more orthodox crew that's a left. And it's actually quite worrying, because they really are taking very, very, very seriously this idea of the indoctrination of church schools becoming churches. I mean, that's actually a phrase that the Archbishop's used. A church school should be a church. You know, and we're pretty well paying for all of this. It's absolutely dreadful. So I think we need to be very, very worried about that. And the consequences of it. I mean, the consequences for discrimination in admissions. And it's becoming more and more difficult, particularly in London, if you're not prepared to go to church, to get your child into school. It's becoming more and more difficult for people just to get into the church to school next door, even in the countryside, because people are being schooled and bussed in from further afield who are coming on the grounds of their faith. And there's discrimination built into the law. The school travel arrangements for children from free school meal type backgrounds are a much higher mileage is permitted for people going allegedly on the grounds of faith than is going for any other basis. It's 6 miles for normal and 15 miles on faith. Now, I asked the Secretary of State to change that on the basis that it's plainly discriminatory and unacceptable. We're still having a bit of a face-off on that. But and it's not unknown for at all. We've had quite a few complaints for almost neighbours to be going to the same school where one gets it for free and the other has to pay or can't get on the school bus and that kind of thing. It's absolutely outrageous because one family says they're doing it on grounds of faith, usually going to Roman Catholic school, and the other just because it's a convenient school. And I just think that's absolutely outrageous, and so we are fighting that quite hard. And I suppose that perhaps brings us a little bit to one of the NSS's distinctive features, which is that partly to do with Christian schools, mainstream Christian schools, but also minority faith schools. I think we probably take the hardest line of all, because as far as minority faith schools are concerned, many of them are multicultural, are monocultural, mono-race, mono-religion, of groups of people that are themselves already separated from society. And the idea, as the previous government used to say, that schools promote cohesion is something that I've never seen demonstrated, and I think not only is it not true, but that the opposite is true. And curiously, the current government has removed a requirement that schools should try to be cohesive. I'm kind of torn on that because I never thought it was possible in the first place, but there's something chilly about actually saying we don't care. And I mean, particularly with some of the Muslim schools, and it's not an anti-Muslim thing, I think there are problems with some extreme Jewish schools as well, and even some extreme Christian schools, where, I mean, really we ought not to be having them, because they I think, encourage extremism. They're just further ghettoising these pupils, children. They are actually reducing the cohesiveness within the community school system, where the kids would otherwise be. And, well, if you can think of a good reason for them, I can't. And why we should pay for all of this. And that's before you get into some of the terrible things that appear to be happening in these schools, in all too many of them. In rote learning of Arabic and the Quran, and then the Jewish ones, I think some of the Jewish ones are no better. And the idea, even within these communities, that they're cohesive is naive, because there's been terrible rows in the Jewish community about these schools. In the Hindu community in Harrow in northwest London, there was general festivities for the opening of the first state-funded Hindu school, only to discover that it's basically Hare Krishna, and that virtually none of the local population tick all the boxes. So you can imagine the row there was over all of that. And you've heard about the Jewish free school case and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, it really is quite dreadful. And something I like to, on a more positive note, to draw people's attention to is there's some absolutely marvellous research. It's up on our website from sadly, she's died now, but a Professor Bruegel from South Bank University, who did some very good work on cohesion in schools and made a very good case that the earlier that you get pupils or children together in schools, the better the cohesion. And if you manage to do it at infant level, you actually bring in the parents as well. And that's a model that I think is difficult to argue with. And as we become more and more a multicultural society, and that extremism becomes more and more a problem, then I think we've really got to look at this very extraordinarily carefully, particularly when you find out that the separatism in these minority communities, I'm thinking mainly about Muslim, but it actually, funny enough, also applies in Northern Ireland, is with the younger people are worse than the older people, which suggests that it's going to point in the opposite, that it's going to move and get worse and worse and worse. And I personally think it will. and